17,000 years ago, in a cave in southern France, in a region called the Dordogne, is one of the most magnificent cathedrals of the world, created by our ancestors. There are images drawn on the walls. The colors are black, white, yellowish, and orange, mimicking the colors, perhaps, of alchemy, of the movement from something that's seen to something it may represent. In front of this great image from Lascaux is an image that's colors seem to mimic what's on the wall of that ancient cave, separated by 17,000 years. Indeed, it's an image of what could be that prehistoric animal, the auroch, the great bull, the great horns of the moon on the head of the animal, and the colors, that same burnt ochre. What is this telling us? Where did this image come from? We know very little about the artist who drew the great images in Lascaux. I personally know the artist of the image on my card, for that artist is the artist of the dream world that I could all too easily say comes from me alone. And yet I know better, for those images that come in dream are open to each and every one of us. Perhaps we're not artists in our way to render them after they come, to draw them upon awakening. And yet those images that come may come from our personal bank of memory. We may dream of things that we've had personal contact with, but at times we dream and bring to life something that is not from our personal iconography, but something from what Carl Jung, the great psychologist, would call the collective unconscious, open to each and every one of us. And that's what I'd like to speak about today. For I am the author of the Mystical Dream Tarot. And yet, in many ways, it is not I who am the author, but the unconscious that rose in dream to bring images to life, not unlike that of our ancestors, that drew the images that continue to call to us from the great caves. And so we look at these images. Do we reduce them to what they look like and say they are horses on the wall? They are indeed some sort of an ancient auroch, some creature that's like a bull. Do we look and say, oh, we have a man confronting an animal, and he has a stick with him with a bird on it? Why were these images drawn on the wall? Where did they come from? What did they mean? The ancestors surely were not going into the bowels of the earth to draw these images in the dark, meaning to just give a gallery to what they saw in the external life. In fact, if we look at what Lascaux looked like, we look at this underground system of caves, and immediately it brings to mind another underground system of caves in the Valley of the Kings. Indeed, both going into the bowels of the earth that gives rise to all that we see and all that goes back, born from dust, born from mud that's shaped on a potter's wheel. Each of the images that comes to us returns to the earth. And these ancestors drew on the walls of a cave that went deep, deep as the image that came through dream of a cave that has light shining within it, and a beam that stands and has the light being brought into the world. These ancient images have a lot to tell us. about what the power of the image actually is. It's unreasonable to think that centuries ago, 17,000 years ago, our ancestors merely drew these images to keep in memory the animals that they saw around them, that they brought others, perhaps youngsters, in to look at these animals in the dark. That doesn't quite make sense. But what does make sense is that perhaps there was something they were trying to represent. There was perhaps an altered state of consciousness represented by the one being that is often called the shaman of the caves of Lascaux. And when one looks at the bird that's on that wand, one cannot help but think that it is the ecstatic state of mind, of consciousness, that the individual is able to rise like a bird and fly beyond the limits of waking consciousness. For if we stop at the image and go no further, we don't see the depth of its truth. The same way that the images that rise from a dream, certainly the image of a bull or an auroch that has nothing to do with the waking consciousness of one individual who happened to draw that picture from dream, shows us that that image is meant to take us beyond. Where a set of tarot is nothing more than a set of cards, indeed, tarocchio, set of cards, playing cards, that could be used in any sort of form, dates back to a time when images were shown on those cards. But did the authors and artists of those images want an individual to stop at the face value of what the image was showing? Or indeed, was it meant to take someone further and deeper into the halls of consciousness? In the Valley of the Kings, on the walls of the tombs, as well as on the papyri that make up the books of the afterlife, we have images of a deity bringing the deceased beyond the gates that meet him in the afterlife, in the Amduat. That being is in darkness, he's always black. Interestingly enough, in alchemy, we begin with the black, like the blackening of the corpse that must be reduced, burnt to cinders that turn to white, to yellow, and to gold. And so the gold that we see on the sarcophagi, the gold that we see on the many images, the gold that fills the background as the deceased brings gifts as they arrive in the other world, that gold is enlightenment. That gold is being able to see beyond what physically bound in life, the eyes. For the eyes bring us to waking reality, but the eyes do not see beyond. When we look into the mirror to see who we are, depending upon when and where, we look different. We have different states of life and different jobs. We're a child, we're an adolescent, we're an adult, we're an elder. We're a mother, we're a daughter, we're a wife, we're a sister, we're a teacher, we're an elder. All the labels fall apart. We cut those labels as we move on. And of course, there's wisdom, the light that shines upon us. The fire burns everything that we pick up in life. The waters flow. Many are with us, many pass away before us, and many simply move away. What we began and saw in the beginning is not what remains with us. And so as we cut off those labels and we allow our eyes to close to the waking reality and open to what we can see within us, we are able to soar higher. but we carry the ancestors with us. That's the whole reason for looking at the images from Lascaux today, for honoring the ancestors, because these images that the ancestors created, they created because they saw beyond the physical something else. The image was telling them something of power, of seeing, of flying beyond what the eyes could see, of understanding more. The flight was not making a magic carpet or a set of wings that would bring the physical body higher, but was allowing what normally can fly to move higher. As I look at the image of the bird that's raised on that staff next to the being that lies in an ecstatic trance, I cannot help but think of the bird, the bowerbird, that we see in antiquity, that we see flying over the sarcophagi, flying over the mummy in the ancient Egyptian images. For it is that being that is who we really are, that really sees. In the great depths of Lascaux, we see the great depths of the Valley of the King, the movement beyond the image. For if we get stuck in image, if we get stuck in labels, we never get to see what the truth is that lay beyond it. As we move into understanding the imagery, as the dream imagery rose on the mystical dream tarot, it is like putting the sacred lotus to our nostrils. Smell, sacred smell, incense, is often found in many of the temples. The cone on the priestess's head, the lotus flower that comes from her crown, all was scented. And what most of us don't realize as we honor the image, we often forget scent being a tremendously powerful connector to memory. Whereas there's one neuron from the nasal mucosa to the brain, scent connects us to the past. And in this image of a beautiful young woman, a priestess, holding the lotus flower, holding it, smelling the beautiful scent, one also realizes that that lotus flower rose from the depths of the waters of unconscious. Every morning when the sun rose, from the depths of the Nile rose the lotus. And at night, when the sun went back into the depths of the unconscious, beneath the horizon, so did that lotus. The symbology was there, and the ancients understood it. And they understood that there was gold in the depths. There was gold in the understanding. The image was it. And when we look at the image and images that fill the tombs and temples of Egypt, we're looking at ourselves. The ancients always felt that Egypt was a mirror of the heavens, as above, so below. Yes, for those images were meant to take us, to transcend what we saw in waking reality. And as the deceased was passed to the place of enlightenment in the mansion of millions of years, it was the living that were to learn that there are many gates that we go through the consciousness of waking. We are to fly on the wings of the eternal. We are to let our unconscious rise. We are to let that which is within us rise. For that is the flight of the imagination. That is the flight of the ability to see beyond what the physical eyes show us. For the physical eyes will help us to navigate the physical world. But if we wish to fly higher, if we wish to see more, if we wish to understand the depths of who we really are, past who we think we are, if we want to move beyond the image that we see in the mirror, ever aging, ever changing, never constant. We will break those chains the same way that we'll look at the image and allow it to speak. And we will travel with the ancestors. 17,000 years ago, our ancestors knew. They drew those images in the great caves that line that area in southern France. Temples to the divine. And those images were meant to transcend, as though went through the many gates of consciousness. So are the cards meant to help one. They're portals, they're doorways. The same way Champollion looked at the hieroglyphs and looked at the images and at first believed that what he saw was what they meant. If he saw a bird, it represented a bird or a specific kind of bird. But in fact, that's what held him back from seeing the truth. For indeed, there was a deeper meaning, and deciphering that meaning meant he had to transcend the mere appearance, the mere perception. The bird wasn't a bird, not always. Sometimes it took a flight in another direction. It had meaning. So do we as we look at images. Images from the great tombs, images from the great caves. We look at these images and take flight with our imagination. And we look at the colors, for we have to transform from the black that needs to take us away from giving concrete, definitive meanings to everything around us, and not allowing the image themselves to open up as doorways to bring us further into an experience. The ancestors are all there waiting. They're waiting to speak to us. They're waiting to deliver images. And as the images rise to each and every one of us, we will receive different messages at different times. But the image flies, and it flies like a bird. It flies like a healing eye, carrying the feather of truth. And there's a greening on us, which means an aliveness, a growth of something new that we understand and allow it to sprout. And we remember the earth, the black land where the seeds were placed, and from that blackness we had a sprout of green, and that green reached up and flowered and bloomed and gave fruit and faced the gold of the sun. And so, like our unconscious, it lies hidden in our depths, in the caves that are within us. And like the animals that took flight, like the great horse that was able to gallop great distances, like the powerful animals with their horns like the crescent moon, moving upon our consciousness from black to yellow to gold, passing through the whitening to let us let go of preconceived notions so that we may fly like the great sorcerer, like the great shaman in his ecstatic trance. The bird awaits the flight, and that bird is the bird of the imagination. There is no definitive meaning on each and every card. There is only the flight of the bird that opens up that window, that portal, to help each and every one of us see what we need to see at a specific time in our life, because we live in time. And time is an ever-flowing stream. It is not constant. From one day to the next, although we think we stand in the same place, the waters have already passed us through the many hours and times of our life. So within the tarot, within the cards, Where do the images come? They come from dreams. And yet, as the images come from the cave of the unconscious, we see how the cave from 17,000 years ago in Lascaux and 4,000 years ago from the Valley of the Kings, and yes, today, in the mind of one person in one place, producing one deck of cards, needs to give credit to all those ancestors and all those artists from 17,000 years ago and beyond that. For the unconscious belongs to us all, and it is collective. And the images that rise are valid and true, and they're doorways to help each and every one of us to move beyond any sort of trouble, any sort of problem that we have. The image helps us to understand better, helps us to carry the issues and balance them. For with the eyes we see the waking reality. With the inner eye of the imagination, we balance it by seeing further, by allowing a portal to open to see things in a new way. The Mystical Dream Tarot is about that. It's about allowing ourselves the privilege of opening the door of the image and allowing what wishes to come through and help us, that we might better be able to balance walking through everyday life, honoring the great ancestors, honoring the images that filled the ancient caves, and realizing every one of us is a part of it. As we begin our day, as we look at a card, whether from this deck or any deck we have, allow it to open a portal. Allow us, each one of us, to go further and deeper within ourselves.